So Kat and I are sitting here having a great discussion, and we wanted to turn to talking about issues of multidimensional reality. You know, so the multidimensional reality in your practical everyday life, I think. Yes. Okay. So what's a good starting point, do you think?
I think a good starting point is, why is it important right now to think about it at all?
Yeah.
And how can you practice that? How can you practice so you feel more that you thrive and that you are okay with that things are changing faster and faster?
Okay.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I think to take a step back first, because one way of answering this would be to say that most people today, their awareness and their consciousness is totally fixated on the third dimensional world. And so it's not just where we're going, but first start off by looking at where we are, because what happens is that, you know, we create an understanding of ourselves and the world around us that is dominated by the way physical reality works. We use analogies from physical reality, and we talk about it as if physical reality is all there is, and this is in the core the basic problem, which is that nothing in the world and nothing around us is limited to the third dimensional reality. Everything has an existence in realities beyond the third dimension. And the simple first way of understanding this is to realize that in everyday life, when you're interacting with the world and you're interacting with objects, you're not just interacting with say the physical material of the object, but you also are taking in its significance, its meaning to you. So if I'm looking at an object that's a vase, you know, I'm not just seeing the vase as a third dimensional object. I see it as a category vase. I perceive it in relationship to other vases I have known. You know, there's all kinds of things that come in about the significance of it, and it has all those levels of meaning to me.
That is different to someone else.
It's different, and it could be different to someone else, but some of that is shared because it's part of our shared collective consciousness. We've all been perceiving vases, you know, so we have built up a collective understanding of what a vase is, for instance. Can you imagine looking at flowers and only understanding them as third dimensional objects? I mean, a flower is just an object, you know, with color and a certain shape, without significance or meaning. So where is that significance and meaning? Well, I think the most important thing is that much of that aspect of our everyday reality is in the fourth dimension. And the fourth dimension and the third dimension are also interwoven with one another. We have all of these physical objects, but we also are living in a kind of a dimension of meaning and significance, and none of that is itself organized according to the way the third dimension is, but it has all these associations. So, for instance, in the fourth dimension, you know, what's distance? Say in the third dimension, when things are physically apart, it takes time and energy to go from point A to point B. But in the fourth dimension, in terms of meaning, things that are close to one another in meaning are immediately joined. You can jump from one to the other.
Like you mean like association, that you associate something to something else.
Yes. Association is immediate. It's like the distance disappears automatically. It has a whole different set of rules. But the first thing is realizing that the everyday life that we think of as third dimensional is interwoven with all of these levels of meaning, which I say are fourth dimensional. We're all very much attuned and feeling a fourth dimensional world that's invisible to us. So the fourth dimension is there. We're experiencing it where our brains are working in relationship to structures that are in the fourth dimension, and that's happening all the time. And the problem, of course, comes up when we think that's it. We think that whatever it is that we're currently thinking in the third dimension and the fourth, we think that's all there is. But in fact, let's say my vase that I've been looking at, I see it as a third dimensional object, and as a third dimensional object, it has no meaning. It's just an object, right? If I add the fourth dimension to it, now it suddenly has meaning and significance. If I can go up another level to the fifth dimension, there's other levels of meaning and significance to it. And those levels are much harder to describe in terms of the language of third dimensional reality. But there is some structure of meaning to it that we can take in a fifth dimensional way, that we have that capacity to understand and perceive things at the fifth dimension, but our brain is wired for the third dimension. So we have this brain that's ready for physical reality in the third dimension. That's what it's all wired for. But there's some other part of us that understands the fourth dimension, it understands the fifth dimension, it understands the sixth. But we can't think about those things the same way we do with the third dimension. There are different ways of thinking, but we can be open to it. We can take in that information, we can feel it, we can be influenced by it. So to understand ourselves as more than just third dimensional objects, to understand ourselves as receptors of all the energies at all the dimensional levels that there are, around us and in the universe, that opens up our lives to much, much greater significance and depth. So,
would you say, would there be any difference if you are aware of the fact that there exist fifth and sixth and higher dimensions compared to if you are ignorant about that?
Yeah, well, I think whether you intellectually know about it or not maybe doesn't matter. The question is, are you taking in the energies? Is it affecting you? Are you open to the influence from the fifth dimension? Because then when you walk through the world, you have this other level of meaning and significance that's there in everything around you. And not just fifth, but sixth and seventh, eighth dimensional awareness opens up. And so any object or any being that you encounter has this hugely expanded sense of meaning and significance for you, because you are open to the influence from all of these dimensions. Now, the question is, can you do things consciously to aid
exactly.
this? Yes, okay.
Exactly. How to do that?
How to do that? Okay, so I think in a lot of ways, our consciousness or our residual consciousness is just a reflection of wherever it is that we're putting it most of the time. So if you're living your lives, and you're focusing on the third dimensional world, and that's where all your energy going and where all your consciousness is, that's where it kind of resides. That's where, okay. So we need to spend some time opening up our awareness and our consciousness to other dimensional levels. And the more that we do that, and the more that we learn to open up ourselves in everyday life, then the more it is that we step into being a more fully activated and actualized human being. So,
could you give a practical example?
Okay, yes.
How do you do it? You're walking around
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the street. And
Okay. Well, I mean, I think like a lot of spiritual practices, we can do this as a form of meditation to open the doors. And where are the doors? There are doors that are inside of our energy bodies. There's doors that we're aware of, they're connected to the pineal gland. But there's also doors that are specific to these dimensions, so that with a little bit of practice, you find out that inside your head, connected to the central column, at about this level, you might say there's a door for the third dimension, and then the fourth, and then the fifth, the sixth. The seventh is just underneath of the skull. The eighth is embedded in the skull. The ninth is slightly above the head. So what you can do is try to activate those doorways. And the way that I do this, and the way I recommend doing it, is to do an exercise that has to do with bringing all of your awareness to those points. So let's say that, to give an example, I talk through how I would do this. I would usually start with the fifth dimension. So I know I can feel inside my head to a point where it's just about where the pineal is, maybe on the upper side of the pineal, where there's, for me, what I would think of as the doorway of fifth dimensional consciousness. So the exercise is that I shift all my attention to that location, and I call all of my points of awareness to that location. I give all of my attention to it. And as I do this, I'm coming to a place where there's nothing here for me other than that point, the light that I perceive in that point, and myself viewing that point. And if any other thoughts come in, I cancel them and I bring all my awareness to that point. So I come to a place where that point is like a ball of light, and I'm just outside the ball of light. And then I move closer, and I start moving into it, until now I'm actually in that ball of light that I can call the fifth dimensional doorway. And then I can say to myself, I am my fifth dimensional self. I am my fifth dimensional self. I am my fifth dimensional self. And I keep all my attention there. And I open myself up to trying to understand what fifth dimensional perception feels like. And of course, this is almost like relaxing a muscle that's so tense. There's a tension that is hard to release, but the more you release it, the more you relax into it, and you find that way of understanding, or that way of sensing, that's based and rooted in the fifth dimension. And by putting all my attention on that point, I'm giving energy to that point. I'm strengthening it, you might say, so that my doorway to fifth dimensional perception becomes stronger and more open to me if I come back. And I'm also spending time connecting to this fifth dimensional perception. And in that case, my residual consciousness retains something of that experience. So when I'm ready, I'll step back. I'll leave the light in the center. So now I'm observing the light. And when I would normally be doing this, then I would shift my attention up to a point slightly higher than the fifth dimensional doorway to the sixth dimensional doorway, and repeat the process of merging all my awareness there. And you can continue that process up through all of these points. I think it's particularly beneficial to do it up to the point of eighth dimensional awareness, which is right in the top of your head, and if you practice this enough, you get to the point where you kind of can feel where these are, because it just takes practice to say, yeah, okay, I'm going to shift to that sixth dimensional point. I'm going to shift to the seventh dimensional point. I'm going to shift to the eighth dimensional point. When you do that, what you see with your eyes doesn't change, but what you feel, what your senses take in as a whole shifts with every one of those. And with more practice and more familiarity, you come to have a feeling for, what is perception in the seventh dimension like? And then that opens up other possibilities, maybe to take in more specifics about seventh dimensional perception.
So I have a feeling that if you are really good in practice this, your life will be more colorful.
Yes, deeper, richer, absolutely. Because the earth that we walk is multidimensional. Our world is multidimensional. We've been talking about the problems of people and organizations that are sort of stuck. A lot of that is being stuck in a third dimensional reality and being separated from the greater multidimensional significance of things. But I think it's part of our of our birthright as human beings to be able to step into a kind of consciousness that's open to all these dimensional levels, so that we know when we're encountering the world, when we encounter the things of the world, that they are not just what they are as a third dimensional object, but they have the significance in all these other domains. And maybe in the large scale of evolution, maybe our brains will adapt and we'll develop more facility for direct perception of those dimensions. But as it is now, what we can do is that we can live in third dimensional bodies that have multi-dimensional light body fields embedded in them, and that we can walk the earth in multi-dimensional consciousness, that even while our bodies are in the third dimension, we see the significance of the world around us in a more high dimensional way.
Could it also be that we get more signals what's right for us?
Absolutely, because as we shift more of our consciousness to operating at these higher dimensional levels, what we're doing is coming closer and closer to alignment with oneness. So the ultimate reality, the ultimate truth that we learn through all of this is that everything is born out of one light. Everything is born out of the actions of one divine creator. There's this unity of all things. And the more we're able to, engage our greater self, the more and more we're able to live our lives in alignment and harmony with that oneness.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, but it's the truth. It's easy to talk about the beauty of it because it's the reality.